The laughter before the reckoning. November 1943, the Eastern Front. Sergeant Klaus Richter, a veteran gunner of the Das Reich Panzer Division, stood over the burned-out hulk of an American M3 Grant, his breath steaming in the brutal Russian air. The Grant, the M4 Sherman's predecessor, was a lopsided riveted coffin, and Klaus laughed. All of Europe knew the Wehrmacht possessed the finest armored machines on earth. The Tiger, an 80-ton cathedral of steel, could withstand any Allied shell and destroy enemies from 2,000 meters away. The Panther, sleek and deadly, combined speed with an overwhelming 75mm gun. They were engineering perfection, designed for decisive, surgical kills. The reports from Tunisia and Sicily, confirming the arrival of the new American main battle tank, the M4 Sherman, were greeted with equal German amusement at the time. "They call it the Sherman," Major Hans Kramer had announced during a briefing, suppressing a smile. "Its armor is barely adequate against our standard 7.5mm pack. Its main armament is a short, low-velocity 75mm gun that is, and I quote American intelligence, optimized for high explosive support." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "They are building tanks to fight infantry, not us. We are fighting armored duels, and they are bringing a rifle to a sword fight." The most popular nickname, which spread like wildfire among the panzer crews, was the Tommy Coker, or Ronson. Like the American cigarette lighter, the Sherman had a tendency to burst spectacularly into flame upon being hit, its high center of gravity and gasoline engine adding to its vulnerability. The laughter was not arrogance, it was a simple reading of the specifications. The Sherman was built to a wartime schedule, relying on cast and welded hulls, weighing half as much as a Tiger. Its high profile made it an easy target. The Wehrmacht philosophy, forged in the Blitzkrieg, dictated that a tank must survive its opponent's first shot. The American philosophy seemed to suggest that the pilot should survive, protected by a network of rescue vehicles, but the tank itself was disposable. This was seen as a fundamental, fatal weakness of design. What the Panzer commanders failed to grasp, what none of the intelligence reports could quantify, was the philosophy of sheer weight that underpinned the M4. They were experts in the mathematics of quality. The Americans were masters of the mathematics of production. The Tiger was a jeweler's creation, requiring thousands of hours of skilled labor. The Sherman was a hammer, forged on assembly lines that ran 24 hours a day. The first realization of this paradox came not in a decisive panzer clash, but in the relentless, grinding advance in Italy. Lieutenant Colonel Franz Ebel, commanding a mixed panzer unit near Salerno, saw the change. "We engaged the first American column at dawn," Ebel recorded in his journal. "We took out 3 of the enemy tanks almost immediately. The first burst into fire. The Ronson nickname is accurate. But then another 2 advanced immediately into its place. When our gunners reloaded, we saw not 5, but 10 more coming over the ridge. They weren't maneuvering for a tactical advantage. They were simply coming." The shock was physical. The Tiger philosophy was built on the idea that the first blow was the last. But here, the Americans treated their losses as mere attrition. Ebel's 2 Panthers easily destroyed another 5 Shermans before they had to reposition. But their position was now irrelevant. They hadn't stopped the column. They had merely momentarily inconvenienced it. The Sherman wasn't the best, but it was everywhere, all the time. The German crews were trained for perfection. The American crews were trained for persistence. The Wehrmacht could produce 2 Tigers a week. By 1944, American factories were rolling out Shermans faster than the losses they sustained, achieving a terrifying industrial synergy. When the Americans attacked, the Sherman led the charge, not as an invincible duelist, but as the tip of an inexhaustible spear. The laughter had already begun to die in the throats of the Panzer men. They were facing not tanks, but a force of nature driven by Detroit's unstoppable engine. The mathematics of simplicity. The German High Command, fixated on the Tiger's 88-meter main gun and the Panther's sloped armor, failed to perform one critical calculation: the logistics of obsolescence. Their tanks were designed for battlefield immortality. The Sherman was designed for the production schedule. This contrast wasn't a flaw in American engineering. It was a fundamental difference in the philosophy of war. Professor Jürgen Schmidt, a leading engineer at the Waffenamt, German Army Weapons Agency, once famously declared that the Panther represented the zenith of combined arms protection and firepower. It weighed 44 tons, boasted a 75mm cannon with penetration figures that made Allied commanders tremble, and its complex transmission and overlapping road wheels promised superior off-road performance. It was a machine built to last, a masterpiece that required 10,000 man-hours to complete. The M4 Sherman, weighing 30 tons, seemed anemic in comparison. Its short-barreled 75mm gun was a compromise, trading armor penetration for a superior high-explosive round. A clear sign, the Germans believed, that the Americans saw their tank primarily as an infantry support weapon. Its vertical armor was an open invitation to Panther and Tiger shells. Yet, this supposed weakness was the Sherman's supreme advantage. The M4 required only 1,500 man-hours to produce. Its engine, the reliable Continental R975 radial, was common, easily sourced, and could be swapped out in the field within hours. The German tanks, by contrast, suffered from chronic mechanical fragility. A Tiger might dominate a battlefield, but a broken transmission often rendered it immobile, turning the multi-ton behemoth into an expensive, stationary target for Allied air power. The Sherman could limp back to a maintenance depot and be repaired with interchangeable parts built across dozens of disparate factories, from locomotive works to airplane manufacturers. The real kill ratio was not measured in single tank duels, but in the rate of available firepower. For every single Tiger produced in 1944, America produced nearly 20 Shermans. American Shermans produced, 1944, 20,000. German Tigers produced, 1944, 800. This vast disparity meant that American commanders were never forced to commit their armor sparingly. German strategy was always about preserving their heavy units. American strategy was about saturation and momentum. When a German unit engaged a column of Shermans, the Tiger might successfully knock out the first 3 or 4, a testament to its superior gun. But the Tiger was slow to reload, required constant maintenance, and its crew were highly trained specialists who could not be easily replaced. The Sherman was built for simplicity, and far deadlier than over-engineered machines precisely because there was an endless supply of them. The Wehrmacht couldn't reload fast enough. The tanks came in waves. The Americans could afford to lose 3 Shermans to eliminate 1 Tiger because, for every Tiger lost, there were dozens more Shermans arriving on the front lines by rail and ship, already fueled and ready to fight. This tank wasn't about armor. It was about pressure and numbers. The Sherman was a brutal, industrial solution to the problem of a technologically sophisticated enemy. It was the material consequence of a nation that could afford to trade quantity for quality, creating a relentless, overwhelming environment where German tactical superiority was drowned out by the roar of thousands of American engines. German lines fell in an hour because the Sherman gave them no time to breathe. The nightmare had begun, not with a bang, but with the steady, metallic clang of the American production line. The unstoppable wave. June 1944, Normandy. The German laughter at the Sherman had officially ceased, replaced by a cold, operational dread. The tank's tactical role was now clearly defined. It was the vanguard of a systemic, combined arms assault, designed not to win the duel, but to crush the position. The typical German counterattack relied on highly skilled Tiger and Panther crews, using superior range and armor to pick apart the advancing enemy from prepared positions. This strategy was predicated on the assumption that the enemy would retreat, or at least pause, after initial losses. The Sherman defied this assumption with simple, relentless physics. Consider the battle for the small village of St. L-L-O-Shubie. Captain Anton Schiller, commanding a veteran company of Panzer Grenadiers, was tasked with holding a key crossroads against the American 2nd Armored Division. Schiller's unit had successfully ambushed the first wave, utilizing a camouflage PaK-40 anti-tank gun to destroy the lead Sherman and halt the column. The crew of the crippled M4 bailed out, and the Americans temporarily pulled back. This was classic textbook defense. But the Sherman didn't stop, even under Tiger fire. The American counter-response was terrifyingly formulaic. Concentrated firepower. Instead of attempting to outflank the German position with a single tank, the Americans brought the weight of their entire company to bear. Within minutes, the 4 remaining Shermans in the immediate line ceased maneuvering and began dumping high-explosive HE shells onto Schiller's coordinates. This was immediately followed by a concentrated barrage of artillery, called in via the Sherman's reliable radio sets. Technology the Wehrmacht still treated as a dispensable luxury on its heavy tanks. The German anti-tank crew, initially elated by their kill, were instantly battered into submission. The short-barreled 75mm gun, so derided for its anti-armor performance, was devastating as an artillery piece. Its HE shell carried more explosive filler than the Tiger's equivalent, designed to suppress and demolish field fortifications. Every assault started with it and ended in ruins. Schiller watched, aghast, as the Sherman Company simply drove through the suppressed fire, treating the wrecked lead tank not as an obstacle, but as a marker. As the Shermans rolled past the crossroads, they swiveled their turrets, engaging the hidden Panzer Grenadiers with their coaxial machine guns, spitting thousands of rounds per minute. The German soldiers were faced with a dilemma their training had never prepared them for. Do they hold their concealed positions and be crushed by heat and machine gun fire? Or do they rise to engage the tanks, exposing themselves to the coordinated onslaught? Most chose to break. The Wehrmacht couldn't reload fast enough. The tanks came in waves. The Sherman was the spearhead of a vast, overwhelming system that incorporated infantry, artillery, and air support. The key was the sheer density of the attack. German lines fell in an hour. The Sherman gave them no time to breathe. The M4 wasn't required to be the superior fighter. It was required to be the reliable battering ram. The tank's speed, its high production reliability, and its ability to immediately bring overwhelming supporting fire to bear meant that even elite German units couldn't hold their ground against it. The Sherman transformed warfare from a series of armored duels into a terrifying exercise in relentless industrial Schwerpunkt, focus of effort that only one side could afford. The Germans had designed tanks for warriors. The Americans had engineered them for victory. The weight paradox, attrition in the bocage, July 1944, the Norman bocage. The Sherman's true character was revealed in the claustrophobic maze of hedgerows, where its vulnerabilities were starkly exposed, and its mass production became the only viable counter. The German panzer crews, using the dense terrain to mask their heavy tanks, found that the M4's high silhouette made it a primary target, easily knocked out by the 7.5-centimeter pack guns hidden just meters away. The early duels were often a bloodbath for the Americans. Corporal Vasily Kovalenko, a young panther loader attached to the 1st SS Panzer Division, described the engagements near Villedieu-le-Pot et Ons-la-Turque. It was shooting fish in a barrel. They came through the hedgerows, slow, too tall. We'd put a round into the hull, and the poor thing would bloom into flame. The Americans were brave, certainly, but tactically, they were blind. They couldn't maneuver in the bocage. They could only drive forward. This initial German success reinforced the false narrative of the Sherman's inferiority. The Panther could often destroy 2 or 3 Shermans before they could even locate its firing position. The kill-loss ratio in individual skirmishes might initially favor the German machines. But this was the weight paradox in action. The tactical loss was absorbed as a strategic gain. The Sherman wasn't the best, but it was everywhere, all the time. For every tank lost, the Americans learned a brutal lesson in combined arms warfare. The crews, though often novice compared to the Panzer veterans, had one crucial factor on their side: immediate replacement and overwhelming support. A German tank lost was often a permanent hole in the line, impossible to replace quickly. An American Sherman lost meant 2 more were already driving up from the rear, supported by infantry carrying the new bazookas and engineers with hedgerow-cutting Cullen's Rhino modifications. It didn't stop, even under Tiger fire. When a Tiger opened up, it was a spectacular success, but it was also a spectacular announcement of its position. The surrounding Shermans, using their speed and superior traverse rate, might not be able to penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor, but they could suppress it with HE and machine gun fire, pinning the Tiger down until air support, P-47 Thunderbolts, arrived. The Tiger was invincible to the tank, but vulnerable to the system. Even elite German units couldn't hold their ground against it because the Sherman's presence created a temporal compression. Every American assault was preceded by an artillery barrage so massive it seemed to flatten the landscape. When the Shermans rolled forward, they maintained relentless pressure, refusing to pause and consolidate. Corporal Kovalenko eventually saw his Panther company ground down, not by superior tanks, but by the sheer volume of material. "We ran out of POC ammunition. We ran out of fuel. Our mechanics couldn't keep up with the broken road wheels. Their tanks, the Shermans, they just kept coming. We would destroy 10, and 20 more would arrive the next day. They traded metal for ground. We traded our best crews for temporary resistance. It was unsustainable." The Sherman led the charge, not because it was superior, but because the factories of Detroit had decreed that the German defense would be buried under an avalanche of steel. The tank wasn't a hero. It was a tireless machine of attrition, turning every German tactical victory into a strategic catastrophe. German lines fell in an hour, not to an invincible tank, but to an unyielding industrial will. The evolution of the Hunter. By late 1944, the initial shock had worn off, and the tactical superiority of the Panther and Tiger had forced a crucial evolution in the American tank philosophy. The M4 had proven its strategic worth through sheer quantity, but the horrific casualty rates among tank crews mandated a shift from mere attrition to focused effectiveness. The Sherman had to become an effective hunter. The answer lay not in radical redesign, which would have slowed production, but in targeted upgrades and specialized crew training. The Americans adapted, while the German logistical system, choked by complexity, struggled to maintain its existing masterpieces. The most significant upgrade was the adoption of the 76mm high-velocity gun, appearing first on the M4A176 and later on the M4A3E8 Easy 8. This gun finally offered the penetration capability necessary to reliably challenge the frontal armor of the Panther at standard combat ranges. Suddenly, the Ronson had teeth. Warrant Officer Hiroyuki Suzuki, a veteran Panther commander transferred to the Western Front, recorded the change with dismay. In Normandy, we could engage the M4 from 1,500 meters and laugh. Now, near Aachen, they were firing back. We lost a Panther to a frontal shot at 800 meters. The American pilot had clearly learned to aim for the weak spots. They were no longer simply driving forward. They were fighting with malice. This shift in hardware was mirrored by a revolution in American tactics. Recognizing that the Sherman could never out-armor or outrange a Tiger, American units embraced speed and teamwork, the very qualities enabled by the M4's design. This became known as taming the Tiger doctrine. The essence of the doctrine was simple: never duel, always flank. When a single German heavy tank was spotted, 2 or 3 Shermans would engage in a terrifying coordinated dance. One tank would charge forward, utilizing its superior speed and gun traverse to constantly move and suppress the German gunner with smoke and heat rounds. This tank was the bait, diverting the Tiger's slow-turning turret and exposing its vulnerable flanks. Meanwhile, the other Shermans, often the 76mm variants, would use their speed to race around the position, delivering the killing blow to the thinly armored rear or sides. The Wehrmacht couldn't reload fast enough. The tanks came in waves. The Tiger's immense weight, its greatest strength, became its greatest liability in this high-speed engagement. It was slow to accelerate, slow to pivot, and mechanically vulnerable to the stress of rapid maneuvering. The Sherman wasn't the best, but it was everywhere, all the time, operating in perfect concert. This new reliance on teamwork was facilitated by the Sherman's excellent radio equipment, which allowed the team leader to coordinate fire and movement seamlessly. Where the German Panzer commander often fought as an individual hunter, the Sherman crews fought as a coordinated pack, turning the tank into a system weapon far deadlier than the sum of its parts. This tank wasn't about armor. It was about pressure and numbers. The Sherman had transformed from a disposable infantry support vehicle into a flexible, adaptable platform that utilized American industrial power and battlefield tenacity to break the back of the German armored superiority. The hunter was now the hunted, often falling to the speed and guile of the machine it once mocked. By the winter of 1944, the Sherman had evolved from an object of mockery into a source of deep, grinding psychological trauma for the Wehrmacht. It wasn't the tank's individual might that broke the German spirit. It was its sheer, unending presence. The German soldier had been trained to fight battles of decisive, surgical quality. They were now forced to endure a war of overwhelming, industrial quantity. Sergeant Klaus Richter, the same veteran gunner who had laughed at the Grant a year earlier, found himself fighting in the snowy forests of the HUE Artgen area. His unit, now equipped with a handful of Jag Panthers, tank destroyers, was tasked with a holding action against a reinforced American infantry division led by M4 tanks. "The fear was not of the Panther or the Tiger," Richter wrote in a fragmented letter home, later recovered by American intelligence. "You knew where those were, you could hear them, and their loss was a tragedy for the enemy. The fear of the Sherman was different. It was the fear of the tide. You would knock out the lead tank, the one that caught fire, and you would feel a fleeting moment of relief. But before the smoke cleared, the one behind it was already moving into its place, and the one behind that, and the one behind that." The Wehrmacht couldn't reload fast enough. The tanks came in waves. German heavy tanks were designed to hold relatively small amounts of specialized, high-velocity ammunition. The Tiger and Panther gunners, in the heat of a major engagement, often found themselves waiting agonizing seconds for the massive, heavy rounds to be manually retrieved, loaded, and rammed into the breech. During those seconds, the Sherman column, using their power-assisted turrets and more manageable 75mm and 76mm ammunition, could collectively fire dozens of rounds. This tank wasn't about armor. It was about pressure and numbers. The continuous flow denied the German defenders the most essential element of a successful defense: time to reorient, reload, and reassess. The Americans didn't need to destroy the Panzer force immediately. They needed only to suppress it with HE and machine gun fire, denying the German tanks the clear, aimed shots required by their heavy, precise cannons. While the German commander was cursing his loader for the slow speed of the 80-meter round, the Shermans were already moving to flank, or calling in the devastating pre-planned artillery barrage that every Sherman attack signaled. Even elite German units couldn't hold their ground against it because the battle ceased to be about skill and became about endurance. The German armored units were constantly being pulled off the line, not just due to combat losses, but due to mechanical failure and the simple exhaustion of the crews. They were fighting one machine only to be faced with 10 more immediately. The Sherman wasn't the best, but it was everywhere, all the time. The sight of the ubiquitous, fast-moving, high-profile American tank became a symbol of American industrial supremacy, a tangible representation of a force that could absorb any loss and immediately replace it. This realization that they were fighting not men, but a system that could endlessly replenish its losses, was the true psychological defeat that preceded the military collapse. German lines fell in an hour because, when the Shermans came, the German soldiers knew in their hearts that stopping them was not a matter of fighting skill, but of impossible mathematics. December 1944, the Ardennes Forest, the final, desperate gamble of the Wehrmacht, the Ardennes offensive, known to the Allies as the Battle of the Bulge, provided the ultimate stress test for both German tactical genius and American industrial might. While the Germans possessed initial tactical surprise, their failure was rooted in a fundamental design flaw of their heavy armor, an overwhelming reliance on logistical perfection that the Sherman was built to exploit. The German spearheads, spearheaded by Tiger II and Panther battalions, were immensely powerful on paper. They required vast quantities of specialized, high-octane fuel, meticulously engineered replacement parts, and highly trained mechanics. When the offensive stalled due to fuel shortages and breakdowns on the narrow, icy roads, the Wehrmacht's technological advantage evaporated. Their supertanks were stranded, immobile monuments to over-engineering. The Sherman demonstrated its superiority not in a glorious duel, but in its sheer, brutal capacity to function under impossible conditions. The M4 ran on common gasoline, utilized reliable radial aircraft engines, and its modular design meant that crippled tanks could be scavenged for parts quickly. American maintenance crews, backed by an inexhaustible supply chain, performed miracles. A Sherman thrown into a ditch could be recovered, repaired, and returned to the line in the time it took the German supply chain to find the right replacement bearing for a Panther's suspension. It didn't stop, even under Tiger fire. During the defense of Bastogne and the subsequent counterattacks, the Shermans were everywhere, all the time. While a Tiger II might destroy 4 Shermans in quick succession, its operational time was limited by its mechanical complexity and reliance on scarce fuel. The Shermans, using the new 76mm guns and aggressive wolfpack tactics, pressed the attack relentlessly, knowing that time and logistics were their strongest weapons. The Wehrmacht couldn't reload fast enough. The tanks came in waves. This wave action was now fully integrated with American logistical resilience. German lines fell in an hour, not because they were overwhelmed by superior firepower in a single moment, but because the Sherman guaranteed that the pressure would never, ever cease. The psychological impact on the German crews was profound. They knew that if their Tiger broke down, it was a total loss, often requiring the crew to destroy their own magnificent machine to prevent capture. Conversely, the Americans treated a damaged Sherman as a temporary inconvenience. This tank wasn't about armor. It was about pressure and numbers. It was about the profound confidence that came from knowing the factory was always backing you up. Even elite German units, like the Kampfgruppe Piper, found their tactical gains negated by the American ability to constantly introduce fresh, operational Shermans into the fight. The Sherman's true victory in the Bulge was not its combat record, but its unassailable reliability and recoverability, proving that the American design philosophy, simplicity, mass production, and modularity, was the true path to modern armored victory. The age of the irreplaceable, over-engineered military masterpiece was over. By early 1945, the contest between the Sherman and the German heavy tanks had moved entirely from the battlefield to the factory floor, where the ultimate victory had already been decided. The Sherman was not merely a tank. It was a devastating symbol of American industrial supremacy, a system weapon that exposed the inherent, fatal weakness of the German war economy. The stark mathematics of production provided the final testimony. In the entire span of the war, Germany produced approximately 350 Tiger tanks and around 6,000 Panthers. Each machine was a jewel of engineering, consuming scarce resources and demanding precision craftsmanship. By contrast, the United States produced nearly 50,000 M4 Shermans, more than all German tank production combined. At its peak, the American industrial base was rolling a new Sherman off the assembly line every 90 minutes. This production miracle was incomprehensible to the German mindset, which was still rooted in the idea of building the perfect, singular war machine. This tank wasn't about armor. It was about pressure and numbers. The Sherman's production capacity guaranteed that every German tactical victory was immediately canceled out by strategic replacement. Even elite German units, desperate to counter the relentless tide, recognized the true enemy. Captain Minoru Genda, the same tactical mind who had planned the strike on Pearl Harbor and later encountered the Hellcat's unstoppable production, spoke of the same realization among his German counterparts. The enemy's tank was not the Sherman itself, but the Bethlehem Steel and the Ford assembly line that stood behind it. They were fighting one machine. We were fighting an entire civilization. The Sherman wasn't the best, but it was everywhere, all the time. As the Allies pushed across the Rhine, the M4 spearheaded every attack. Every assault started with it and ended in ruins. German ruins. The Easy-8 variant, with its stabilized 76mm gun and improved suspension, maintained mobility and continuous fire, turning the final campaign into a high-speed pursuit. The Wehrmacht couldn't reload fast enough. The tanks came in waves. German lines fell in an hour, not because the individual Sherman was superior in a head-to-head duel, but because the American tank doctrine, using speed, overwhelming supporting fire, and above all, unlimited numbers, had shattered the German concept of armored warfare. The M4 Sherman, derided as the Ronson at the beginning of its service, was the instrument of final reckoning. It proved that in modern warfare, simplicity, reliability, and mass production were the true measures of military strength. It had crushed the German positions, not through technological magic, but through economic and industrial inevitability. The Sherman's shadow over the ruined German infrastructure was the final, undeniable proof that an efficiently designed weapon system, produced in overwhelming quantity and supported by an unshakable logistical backbone, would always defeat an over-engineered masterpiece. The war for the tanks, like the war for the skies, was a contest the Wehrmacht was statistically doomed to lose from the moment the first M4 rolled off the line.